I have invited 4 guests today to have a conversation about the movement referred to as the Occupy movement, the Occupy Wall Street movement, or the 99% movement. From a small group of people who encamped in New York City September 17th, it has grown to some affiliated actions or camps in, I believe, 900 cities in the U.S. and across the globe. And recently we've witnessed the removal of most of the physical camps. So the questions, I think, are where do we stand now? Where do we go from here? I'm going to ask for a brief update of reports from around the country. And then I want to explore the movement's impact so far, its meaning, its prospects, its challenges and possibilities. How does the Occupy Wall Street 99% interact with other movements, other political entities, including the 2012 elections, the Democratic Party? How much of our hopes can we expect to fulfill through this movement? How wide can it be? How far can it go? And finally, a question is, what will it demand of us? My 4 guests are Sarah Van Gelder, co-founder and executive editor of Yes Magazine and yesmagazine.org. She was a television and radio producer, a community organizer, founder of a cooperative of food co-ops, and a founding board member and resident of Winslow Cohousing. She's editor with the staff of Yes Magazine of This Changes Everything, Occupy Wall Street and the 99% Movement, a book that has already come out. And to learn more about all of this, you can go to yesmagazine.org. Todd GITLIN is a professor of journalism and sociology, and he's chair of the PhD program in communications at Columbia University. He holds degrees from Harvard, Michigan, and UC Berkeley. And if you go back to the time at which he got those degrees, those were 3 of the campuses where a lot of foment was definitely taking place at the time. And he was the 3rd president of Students for a Democratic Society in 1963 and 64. He's the author of 14 books, including Letters to a Young Activist, The Sixties, Years of Hope, Days of Rage, and The Whole World is Watching. It turns out he gave 3 lectures on media, revolutions, and democracy as a distinguished visiting professor at the American University in Cairo between March 23rd and March 29th of this year. Todd's website is toddgitlin.net. David DeGRAW is an investigative journalist, founder and editor of ampedstatus.com, as well as owsnews.org. He's formerly the editorial director of mediachannel.org and the author of The Economic Elite versus the People of the United States. In DeGraw's expanded reports, he piles on amply footnoted data, as I once wrote, with the relentless fury that makes a reader want to cry uncle. But then he connects the dots, and you realize that uncle is not an option. And you can learn more about David's work at ampedstatus.org, ampedstatus.com or .org, and owsnews.org. And finally, my 4th guest in this conversation is ELISE WHITAKER. ELISE WHITAKER is 21 years old. She has been occupying at OccupyLA since day 2, October 2nd, and she was arrested Wednesday morning at the eviction of the LA camp. And for OccupyLA, you can check out the websites facebook.com/OccupyLA, occupylosangeles.org. You can also find a lot of updates and very current information at kpfk.org. Let me welcome you. First, Sarah Van Gelder, welcome.
Thanks, Terrence. Glad to be here.
Okay. Todd GITLIN. Todd, are you with us?
I am, yeah.
Oh, there we go. Okay, didn't hear you. And finally, ELISE WHITAKER.
Hi, good to be here.
Okay. First of all, my first question to each of you is how you personally relate to the, what I will call for the next hour, the Occupy 99% movement. What has been your involvement? How did you get involved? And let me start first with ELISE WHITAKER.
Yeah, I mean, as far as how I got involved, I was following, the Wall Street protests from early on Facebook and Twitter and that sort of thing, and increasingly began to realize that this is going to be the movement of our generation. This was going to be the way that our generation, put our mark on the world in a positive way, and that was something that I wanted to be a part of. And so it was the second day of Occupy Los Angeles, October 2nd, like you said, that I found out that we had an Occupy in Los Angeles, and I went down taking some supplies and planning on maybe staying for a few hours and calling it a day. And by the time I got there around 5 p.m. I'd already promised somebody I'd be back at 8 o'clock the next morning. And from there I was sort of trapped, as it were, in the most wonderful thing I've ever done. Okay.
And you were arrested the other day. What was your personal experience?
It was a challenge. There's very good nonviolent discipline on both sides, which is something that we were counting on, at least from our side. We were very disciplined in nonviolence for a nonviolent movement. But we weren't quite sure how the police action was going to go. All in all, it was also very nonviolent. But as you've probably heard, there were we've been told explicitly that we didn't get released on OR, on our own recognizance, and that bail was set high in order to prohibit us from getting out of jail early and reoccupying. And I think that sort of abuse of the system is a little unfortunate.
Okay, and we'll come back around, ELISE. So that is your personal experience. Let me just ask you, how much of any sort of this sort of political activity had you been engaged in prior to this?
None.
None. But
none. I was sort of, I was a collectivist, online petitions and that sort of thing. And there are some movements that I felt strongly about for some time, but I've never been an activist or an organizer at this level before.
And just one last question before I move on to someone else. You said you felt this was going to be the movement or the issue of the day, but something happened in you. What happened in you that took you from someone who hadn't been involved to someone who's actually been camping for, nearly 2 months?
Over 2 months now. Right. It really was that we needed a change. We needed to really amp up and do something differently, and that these issues have been around, but they've been things that we haven't been able to face. We don't have paid lobbyists, and that's how so much of the 1% gets their things done and gets the changes that they want. And so really we were looking for a way that we could, I think that the occupations, the tents weren't just about the symbol, although that's definitely a big part of it, but also really it provided a place where we would all be together and therefore always be able to be meeting and to be sharing ideas and to lend a sort of permanence to the idea that this is a change that's going to take time, but we need to dedicate the time it's going to take. Okay,
that's ELISE WHITAKER. She has been occupying at OccupyLA since day 2, October 2nd here, and was arrested this past week and is now out, which is good. I'm Terrence McNally. This is going to be a conversation for the next hour about the Occupy 99% movement. Joining me on the phone, and everyone today is on the phone, was ELISE WHITAKER, also Sarah Van Gelder, executive editor of Yes Magazine, editor of This Changes Everything, Occupy Wall Street and the 99% Movement, Todd GITLIN, professor at Columbia, one-time third president of SDS and author of, among other books, Letters to a Young Activist and the 60s, Years of Hope, Days of Rage. Okay, let me move now to Sarah Van Gelder, your involvement with this movement and how it happened.
Sure. Well, first, I just want to say thanks to ELISE and to all the other people who've been camping out at various Occupy Wall Street sites all over the country. It's just an extraordinary movement, and I think it's injected a huge amount of hope and a huge amount of energy into our whole society and given us an amazing opportunity to move forward after, many of us have felt very stuck for some time now. How we got involved is Yes Magazine has been covering, as you do, Terrence, has been covering all sorts of movements for social change ever since we were founded 15 years ago. And among other things that we've been covering are efforts to counter the overwhelming power of corporations and Wall Street. We've been talking about how to build a local economy that is an alternative to the Wall Street system, how to build people power, what we can do about the climate crisis and other environmental crises, and how, once again, that often ties into the overwhelming power of large corporations, especially energy corporations. So when we look at these issues, we're always looking for where are the best hopes coming from, where's the best organizing, where's the most powerful ideas and practical actions, which is actually our tagline. Where are the ways that we can actually move forward? So as soon as we saw the people occupying Zuccotti Park, we immediately started doing coverage of that on our website. We publish a quarterly magazine, so that's sort of our
so the website is where this news lives. Go ahead.
Exactly. Yeah, every day we post updates on what's going on our website on yesmagazine.org. So of course we were scrambling to get as many, coming all the way from Seattle, we were scrambling to get as much as we could from the East Coast and what was going on there. So we started posting articles right away. I happened to be on the East Coast, so I visited Zuccotti Park and I visited the occupation in Washington, D.C. And shortly after that, the publisher of Barrett Kohler Books contacted us and said, we've been looking around at who's covering this movement, and we believe your coverage is the most effective and most insightful. Would you be willing to put together what they call an instant book?
Right.
And so we agreed to do that. It sort of throws all the normal publishing parameters out the window, but in 10 days we were able to put together material we had already posted online. I wrote an original introduction for it. We also worked with some of the people who were at the center of the movement in Zuccotti Park on adapting blogs they'd already written so that they could be prepared for a book anthology. And we just sort of didn't sleep for about 10 days and put this book together.
Right. You were camping in your offices while people were camping in parks. And if people want to get that book, go to yesmagazine.org.
That's right, or to their local bookstore.
Okay, very good. So
I just want to emphasize that all the royalties from this book will go right back into the Occupy movement, and we're also donating 500 copies of it to Occupy sites around the country.
Great. Thank you very much. TODD GITLIN, your involvement and how you got involved.
Well, I'm one of those who had in a state of ill humor about the quiescence of Americans in the light of everything that's gone down, and when it began, I perked up my ears, but I didn't really know very much. And then I started getting asked by reporters, as is my wont, to comment on how this was or wasn't like the movements of the 1960s. That's sort of one of my niches in life. And so it seemed to me that it made sense for me to actually go down and look around, and very quickly started being impressed by differences more than similarities. And then I started getting asked to write articles about these matters, and I wrote a few, and started spending more time down there and talking with people about it and reading about it and hearing about it. And I was kind of flabbergasted, or not, actually. I was just sort of taken by the fact that when my first piece came out, which was in the New York Times, I think on October 7th or 8th, I immediately got flooded with mail. I got more mail about this piece than for anything else I've written in years, and most of it, almost all of it, was actually right on. And I say that not out of vanity, but just out of sort of an indication that how many people were looking to try to make sense of what was going on, try to interpret it. So I've been going on in that way, and I've met with, I've been in Boston. I spoke to Occupy Boston at one point. I've spoken to some public forums, including one at my own university, at Columbia, and one at Harvard, and I then was invited by my agent to write a book proposal, which I did, and now I have a contract to write a book, not as fast as other guests, but I'm actually 2 weeks into it, and I hope to have it finished sometime in January.
Very good. Sometime in January. So this is also being done very quickly. And we do have David DeGRAW on the line with us now. As I said, David is an investigative journalist. He was the editorial director of MediaChannel.org. He founded and is the editor of Amped Status, AMPED STATUS, ampedstatus.com or .org, and is creating a new website, owsnews.org. David, my first question to everyone was how they are involved and how they got involved.
But how I got involved, that's a long story. I guess we can just start by saying I was investigating the economic crisis since it first was happening. And out of my reporting, as you know, Terrence, we had an interview, I don't know how long ago, maybe about a year and a half ago.
I think fairly early on in the whole Amped Status creation.
Right,
yeah.
Right. So in February 2010, we started the 99% movement, and it began building up and online, and we had a great following. And then eventually, to make a long story short, on June 14th of this year, we made our first attempt to occupy Liberty Park. It was something of a weak turnout. We didn't have enough people to pull off the occupation of the park. But in a very serendipitous way, on June 14th, that very same day, there was a protest down the road at City Hall against Bloomberg's budget cuts, and that became Bloombergville. So on June 14th, after our protest at Liberty Park, which also happened in 23 different cities, we had a Move Your Money campaign that day as well. So we joined up with the Bloombergville crew, and from that we then started organizing, and that grew into the New York City General Assembly, and 2,000 occupations later, it's just been incredibly overwhelming. We went from, after the June 14th event failed, we were so incredibly depressed, but we just kept fighting because we knew that, we really had no other choice. This was the only thing.
Well, let me ask a quick one, David. Having started the 99, We Are the 99% as an online phenomenon, and then calling, I believe you were one of those who called for the June 14th, how did you then hook up with Adbusters and with the date of September 17th?
Well, this is the beautiful, serendipitous confluence of events here, everyone working towards the same kind of goal. Through the Bloombergville, the June 14th thing, we had excellent online marketing. We put out videos that were getting hundreds of thousands of views. But we didn't really have the boots on the ground, the old-fashioned community organizing. And the Bloombergville organizations really did have that, but their online campaign was lacking. Mm-hmm. So the merger of the two, and then, the Adbusters, we didn't have any real contact with them. We were planning to, we debated trying to reoccupy Liberty Park on September 10th, and that was highly controversial because September 11th was the day after.
Sure.
10-year anniversary. So as we were having this debate, Adbusters comes out, and, they say September 17th, and what are your demands? So then we had a big debate over the fact that, in all our events in the past, we had demands. It was based on, the 99% movement was based on getting money out of politics and breaking up the banks. But Adbusters framed it as, what are your demands? So then we said, okay, well, let's honor what Adbusters is saying here. And, there was a huge internal fight over that because we felt, a lot of people felt there should be demands. But really it worked out very well. Everyone showed up with their own demands. And part of the appeal in the beginning, was everyone coming to air their grievances. And it's still an internal, it's still debated all over the place, like what exactly do these people want.
Yeah.
But that framing really helped launch this thing. And I also give a lot of credit to the IMC Global Revolution media team because they were live streaming the event from the get-go. On June 14th, we didn't have the live stream, so no one could see what was happening as it unfolded. And then on September 17th, because we had the live stream there, we didn't have that many people who were trying to occupy the park, maybe about 300 or so. But the fact that people can watch the live stream on the Internet and be like, oh, wow, there's a decent amount of people there, and they came and they joined in. So I think that was also another vital factor that made September 17th a success.
Very good. That's the voice of David DeGRAW. He is one of the first organizers of the Occupy Wall Street movement, and he is with me today along with ELISE Whitaker, an OccupyLA camper, Sarah Van Gelder, who's edited a quickie book, This Changes Everything, Occupy Wall Street and the 99% Movement, out of the offices of Yes Magazine, and TODD GITLIN, who's been on the activist beat either as a person or a reporter about 40 years, is with us as well. Let me just ask, David, I'll ask you if you have a quick answer for this one, just sort of a brief, simple status report, number of camps, which ones are still meeting, number of people involved, any national coordination, and sources to learn more if I haven't mentioned them already. So you start out, David, and then if anybody thinks there's something important that he's missed, chime in.
Well, I hear different reports about the numbers of camps. I hear 2,000 worldwide that are going under the Occupy banner. We've been in an evolution kind of phase where we've been evolving, into office space and outside of the camps. I personally, everything is happening so quickly, and there's so many different things going on. It's almost impossible to keep track of everything. But I've been focusing on organizing on a national level. We have something that's really exciting that has started called Inter-Occupy. OccupyLA folks have been helping to drive that.
And that is interoccupy.org?
I think that, I'm not sure if that's the URL or not. It's basically email.
I believe it is. I spoke to Lauren Steiner last night, and I believe that's the correct one.
Right, yeah, Lauren's involved. So, there is this organization happening on a national level. This is a decentralized, leaderless movement, but there's no reason why we can't have much better organization and not so much chaos. So, I've been focusing on that. I've also been, discussing with many people who are within the 1% who, don't want to be associated with the people who are responsible for destroying the economy, who are stepping up and wanting to help this movement. From top, actors and musicians, lawyers. I mean, people are stepping up and they want to help this movement because everyone understands that our political system is broken.
Right.
Everyone gets that. We're all on the Titanic going down together here. I mean, not to sound overly pessimistic, but everyone gets that the system is broken. So all these people are stepping up, willing to help, and we're just trying to figure out the best and most efficient ways to make that happen. And the national organization level is really what I'm focused on now.
And if I could ask you very briefly, a temperature reading on the national organizational level, because I have a feeling this is something which I think the press, for the most part, has been reporting on the individual encampments, the individual events, etc. What do you think is how would you say is the health or temperature of the national coordination?
It's still just coming together. I mean, it's still messy, to be blunt and honest, but it's coming together, and I have full confidence that, through the next 3 months, we will get everything very well organized, but still in a decentralized fashion. And I believe once the spring comes, I think we're going to be an unstoppable force. All indications are. I mean, I'm feeling so positive about the future of this movement.
Excellent, excellent. That's the voice of David DeGRAW. I'm talking with 4 different people today about the Occupy movement. Let me ask you all, if anyone has anything specific they want to add to what David was just giving as a kind of a status report, anyone need to add anything to that?
Yeah. Just
and this is
update. This is ELISE.
Yeah, ELISE Whitaker from LA.
Yeah, Occupy DC has been moved in on today by the police. We're getting reports on Twitter that not all of them have left yet. I don't know if that's true or not. News reports said that some of them were taken out this morning. and arrested, but it would appear via Twitter that there are still some holding strong, standing off with the police.
Let me ask you in turn, and this time I'll start with Todd. The first question is, what's working and why is it working?
Well, it's an interesting question. Having heard how much is going on, we'd have to take a deep breath before generalizing. So consider me having taken a deep breath. I think the movement worked brilliantly to the point of installing itself, becoming a character, a major character in American life, becoming a touchstone, becoming a vocabulary generator, 1%, 99%, Occupy, and so on. Establishing a sort of a culture, a community function where people knew where to go in a given city to find out what these people are up to, and a place that spun off all kinds of auxiliary direct actions, and where people were debating everything from logistics to purposes. And I think in a way that phase was basically cleared out when the mayors began to clear out the encampments. And now we're in a different territory where I think it's too soon to tell what's actually working. Let me put it this way. We don't know what's working until we know at what, until we can ask the question, what's the mid-range hope or aspiration?
We're working toward what, right?
Toward what?
Yeah.
Yes. And I think there are a number of views that are contending, sometimes explicitly, sometimes more covertly or tentatively or implicitly. There's a tendency toward furthering the initial impulse of the movement, which is in some way to model a good society, a beloved community, to use old civil rights language. There's another tendency.
Oh, let me jump in for 1 second, Todd, because that is a point that I was hoping someone would make, and for someone who's new to what we're talking about, when you say modeling it, I believe what you're saying is that at the camps themselves, the kind of decentralized, horizontal, leaderless way in which they're functioning is almost a model of what society could be after this all works. So that's what you meant by modeling.
Yes,
yeah.
And there's been it's easy to pinpoint aspects of the encampments that are not pretty, that are contentious, or even prone to depredations by various marauding elements and so on. But I think it's evident that there are many things that do work, and one thing that works is there's obviously been a feeling of mutuality, mutual respect, and affection on the part of people who didn't know each other before, but find that they're actually working together. So that's real. I mean, this is not just a fantasy. But there are two other thrusts, I think, that are they're not necessarily at odds with it, but they strike different notes. There are those people who say, look, we need changes. We need very specific changes. We may not all agree on the specifics, but basically what we want to do is curb the power of the plutocracy that's been growing for decades. And that can only be done by government action, regulation, taxation, the usual means of government. And that, therefore, the project now is to build up pressure that can actually accomplish those reforms. Now, even if that's the midterm goal, and I think it's reasonable to expect that a lot more people will be thinking that way as soon as we cross the calendar line in 2012 and people wake up and discover that we're in an election year. There'll be different ideas about how to do that. Do you do endorsements? Do you mobilize? How do you deal with the sort of the outer movement that's already been supporting this movement, the unions, Move On, groups like that? A lot of questions in there. So that's the second sort of approach. And then there's a third approach, which is numerically smaller, but it is evident. There are people in the encampments who believe basically that the system is not only broken, but that it was sort of born broken. That is to say, capitalism is intrinsically a system that generates crisis and inequality, and that the goal has to be more revolutionary than simply a political change, more than a change in the occupants of the seats in the legislatures and so on. And so, from their point of view, the middle strategy here, the political one, is is superficial, and so from this point of view, there's a lot of talk about co-optation and its So those, I think, are the three major directions.
I really appreciate that. I think that's I think that's probably my sense of it too. Thank you for articulating that, Todd. Let me shift to let me go with Sarah next. What do you think is working, and why is it working? And because we've got four, everyone try to stay at your concise best.
Sure. Well, I think there's ways in which this movement has already accomplished a great deal. Even if we don't look forward, if we just look at what has already happened, I think the fact that this movement has already named the source of the ills that are causing so much upheaval in our society, so many people who play by the rules, who can't get a job, who are losing their homes, who are losing their retirement savings, who can't get an education or come home from war and find that they don't have any options. The Occupy Wall Street movement has named the source of that ill, and they've named it in a way that large majorities of Americans resonate with, and that has fundamentally shifted the kind of political conversation that is happening. Regardless of what the movement chooses as its next strategies or tactics, I think right now it's very difficult for politicians to bring up any proposal or to have any conversation that doesn't at least implicitly ask the question, is this going to benefit the 1% or is this going to benefit the 99%? That is now very deeply on the table. And let me mention one other thing, which is that I think until this point, not only was the conversation happening in a very different way in public spaces, but in private spaces, I believe a lot of the sense that Americans had about why they personally were experiencing such economic hardship, a lot of people were directing that at themselves and saying it was my own fault. I shouldn't have taken out that loan, or why can't I get a job? Why aren't I good enough? And that kind of shame was a really debilitating thing that was keeping, the kind of uprising that was needed from taking place. And I think because the Occupy movement named the issue so effectively, and then didn't just name it and go out on the street for an afternoon and then go home, but actually started taking space and demanding the right to have power, I think that shifted that sense of shame and humiliation into a sense of, no, this isn't my fault. This is a systemic issue, and I have the right and the power to be part of making that whole system change. And I think that is, if nothing else has happened, those two things, naming the issue and then saying we the people have the right and the power, and we're the sovereigns of this country.
Right.
We're going to go out there and make a difference.
Let me ask you quickly before I go to the next guest, your just a quick response to what Todd laid out as three sort of things that the movement may be about. One is modeling, the other is political, with how it aligns itself and moves the system, and the third is more revolution, how it develops an entirely new system outside the system.
I agree with all 3 points, but I don't necessarily believe that they are in conflict with each other. I think one of the remarkable things about these young people is that they're actually integrating them very successfully. So, for example, the model at the occupation sites of deep democracy and of hearing everybody's point of view means that people who are not normally heard in our political discourse are now getting a voice. And so that will affect politics. And in terms of whether it's revolutionary or not, I think once you start saying this entire system of Wall Street and concentrating wealth and power into the hands of a few, I think that is fundamentally a revolutionary call. Now, how that actually plays out in terms of the tactics that come into the movement in the coming months, I think one of the strengths of the movement is its ability to create autonomous working groups or activist groups that can take on different kinds of targets with different levels of radicalness in autonomous ways that still fit within the principles of the movement.
Right. So that goes to your point of that they don't necessarily have to be opposed.
Exactly.
The three different ways moving forward. Okay. Let me ask Elise, what do you think's working and why is it working?
I mean, ultimately, the thing that's most important, I think, strategically is, in fact, our nonviolence. I think that's the cornerstone to any successful social revolution. We saw it work in the Indian Revolution and in the Civil Rights Movement. And I think as far as tactics, that's going to be the most important thing. Now that we are moving somewhat out of the, tent phase, I think that strategies are changing, and I agree that the camps were very important for the community, and to have a place where people could stand, or who could sleep, could meet, could just sort of share ideas freely 24/7. And I think other things that have been really, really successful has been our use of media, and in particular social media, to reach audiences that we might not otherwise be able to reach and would not have been possible in other movements. I think that going forward, the most important thing is, somebody was saying earlier that everything needs to be passed in terms of legislation, and that's true. That's where we're going to get the changes that we need, and it's important to put the pressure on to get those changes. But in order to do that, it's also important to get the popular support and to actually have 99% of America, backing us up. And I think that while, there are still many people who don't seem to know what the Occupy movement's even about, and plenty with mixed feelings, I think we've already been very, very successful in that we've changed the national dialogue. Mm-hmm. That in the last 2-3 months, we're now talking about the issues. We're talking about Wall Street's greed, and we're talking about our political corruption, and people are starting to have to answer for that. And then just as far as other things we're going to be doing going forward, I think that we're really going to have to focus more on actions, and actions which are impactful. And I know we've got some big ones coming up, local in LA and also nationally. Nationally, this Tuesday, December 6th, we're going to begin occupying foreclosed homes. And like I said, we're not necessarily going to go back to the sort of encampment structure, but there's no reason that we can't continue to use that model to enact positive change. And occupying foreclosed homes has been fairly successful in allowing people to keep their homes. And so we have a number of members in the movement nationally who are going to begin participating in that on a higher level on December 6th. December 19th through 23rd, where nationally we're going to be occupying Congress in terms of district offices of Congress members. And what we're really sort of hoping to do with this is to act as citizen lobbyists. So much of our democracy has been taken over by special interest groups and paid corporate lobbyists. And so we're going to use some of our occupying power and our physical presence to occupy at district offices. So
congressmen, when they're in congressmen and senators, when they're in Washington, basically they are surrounded by lobbyists. The numbers of lobbyists per legislator is absurd. I don't know what it is right now, but it's something crazy. And so what you're saying is that in that week prior to Christmas, when they have come home and they have they are reachable perhaps at their district offices, that there be a showing of the people that we're here, we're watching, pay attention to us as well. Let me go on to David. What's working and why is it working?
Generally speaking, of course, I agree with everything all three other guests have said. From our perspective, we're one group working in this movement of thousands now. But from our perspective, everything in applying this decentralized, nonviolent strategy, everything we've done has been based on 3-month cycles. So, we look at it as, obviously everyone's been pushing in this direction for years, but the fact of the matter is the movement just started on September 17th. Okay, so there needs to be this kind of organic evolution and coming together of shared values and an agenda moving forward. But I don't think you're going to ever be able to identify one particular agenda or one particular platform within this movement. It's always going to be, many different ideas and platforms swirling around, and whoever has that best idea or platform, people will gravitate towards that in a big way. So, and that'll essentially be what kind of leads the day for whatever that time frame is. But, so like I said, the first 3 months we looked at as a big PR campaign to raise awareness.
Establish the identity, establish that this is something that exists and needs to be reckoned with and is available to you.
Right, to raise consciousness of these issues that everyone already has, but, to give a more concrete face, if you will.
Yeah.
And then the next 3 months, we look at it as an organizational time where we can, take the decentralized, somewhat of chaos and organize it into a more powerful force. And then in the 3 months after that, we get into the springtime, and that's when we feel like we're going to do really large-scale actions. And, whether it's getting, perhaps 1 million people to gather in D.C. or, have these protests or occupations where, we don't have 500 people, but we have, 500,000. And so over the next 3 months, we're trying to organize on that level, so when the spring comes, we can have a much more larger, unified public appearance, and at the same time a more defined agenda, but you won't have one agenda. You'll have a whole host of them.
Okay. Let me say, in terms of this agenda piece, and I really appreciate all four of you with the perspectives you've just offered, and I don't mean to be echoing critics. This is really my own observation. Previous movements, abolition, labor, civil rights, women's rights, gay rights, have had some sort of what someone could say, not just an identity, which this movement clearly has in the 99%, 1%, but a pretty clear central demand: abolish slavery, establish unions, establish equal rights for people of color or women, etc. The Tea Party seems to, if you ask people, say it's about less government. Now, what's interesting here is that with the problem is both a Wall Street problem, a U.S. version of capitalism problem, because I make the point on this show whenever I can that even capitalism in other forms, Germany or Scandinavia, is not quite as cut and dried it is here. But American capitalism and Wall Street, with a money-driven federal government, at least, and state governments as well, but let's say the Beltway plus Wall Street equals what has Americans' government and economy both not working for the majority or the 99% of people. That's clear. And then, as Todd said, but the changes actually happen through regulations or through legislation. We're not going to see Wall Street voluntarily, give up certain privileges. Would an end to corporate personhood and or public financing of political campaigns be the kind of unifying demand that might embody what we're talking about? Just a quick response to that from whoever wants to speak first.
Well, if I may.
This is Todd, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
In a way, the movements of the past were simpler, but in a way not. What was the civil rights movement's demand? It was for freedom. It considered itself the freedom movement, not the civil rights movement. And there were many strands within it. At the minimal, eliminate white supremacy. But as soon as you start getting more specific, then you get into tensions, differences. What kind of economic system is required? What kind of foreign policy is compatible with this, and so on. So you see, it gets complicated. What was the women's movement's demand? Well, also equality, but the debate about what constituted equality began from the beginning, and necessarily so. Even the demands of labor, probably the last time there was this degree of popular support for the general thrust of a popular movement was in the 1930s. Mm-hmm. And at that time, the demand was not just to recognize unions, but also to empower them, to see that they were able to gain in power. So I think, in a way, the demand here, the thrust, let's say the thrust, there's an objection to specific demand. The thrust is very clear. 99%, 1% says it rather neatly. It says there's too much power in money, and it should be curbed. Some people would go beyond that. Some people would frame it in different ways. Some people would say it has to do with the role of money in politics. It starts with so therefore one of the demands should be for absolutely publicly financed elections, no exceptions, no ifs, ands, and buts, and so on. I mean, you could have a general discussion, but the general thrust of this has to do with curbing the power of what people call Wall Street, by which they mean unbridled capital, and not capital the way it operates in Germany, let's say, which you mentioned, where management has to share power with unions in corporations, but this sort of wild East Wall Street capital in which money does what it pleases. So I think actually this is the movement is broad, but it is not completely fuzzy by any means, and the reaction of its enemies, I think, make clear they understand what it's about.
Yes. Anyone else's response to what I threw out there?
Yeah, I think that it would be much easier to co-opt the movement if it came up with one very simple demand like corporate personhood. I think it's really important to understand just how broadly that system functions, that systematically allocates wealth and power to the 1%, and then we need to be looking at every single way that shows up and looking at what it's going to take to change it. So I think it's actually very wise that there isn't a short list of demands at this stage in the movement.
Very good. That's Sarah Van Gelder, correct?
Yes.
Okay. David?
I agree with both Todd and Sarah. The 99% movement online, obviously the 99% movement has evolved within Occupy Wall Street beyond anything we had prior to September 17th. Let me be clear about that. But in the year and a half running up to that, we had, over 100,000 people online weigh in with beliefs across the political spectrum. What can we find common ground on? And after a very laborious process, it came down to getting money out of politics, which we call the system of political bribery, campaign finance, lobbying, and the revolving door between Washington and Wall Street. That was kind of demand number one, addressing those key issues. And demand number two was breaking up the banks. There was a Brown-Kaufman amendment that was put forward during the financial reform process. It got 33 votes in the Senate. We pushed hard for it, but it failed. But that's a start, to break up these big banks. And, those were kind of the two demands that the 99% consistently agreed on. But, like Sarah said, it is important that, this movement just started on September 17th. And, we can be pigeonholed if we have one demand. And it is early for us to have, one or two demands. So it needs to evolve still. But, they're right, though. This is all about, the concentration of wealth.
Let me ask each of you, if I give you 45 seconds, a year or two from now, things have gone very well. What happened? In other words, what's something that if we look back a year or two from now, we go, that happened because of the Occupy movement, and we are better for it?
I'd like to see a serious push, which is close to success, in restoring the Glass-Steagall Act, which would break up the giant banks. I would like to see a serious move in the direction of complete public financing, and I'd like to see this movement immersed in 1,000 activities at 1,000 different levels of commitment and skill and intention.
Great. ELISE, a year from now, 2 years from now, it was successful. What happened?
I mean, success for me is what for me is if not the central demand per se, one of the central issues, and that's success will be once we've reclaimed our democracy back from Wall Street, once the people once again have power to enact change in our country.
Okay. Sarah?
Just to be a little bit wild, I would say that we don't any longer have huge multinational corporations and huge unaccountable Wall Street firms. We have local banks, we have local business. They're collaborating to create the things, the goods and services we need. And because they're no longer huge, they're no longer exerting outsized power on our democracy. So we've actually got democracy functioning.
We've scaled down those entities so that they are more people-sized in a way. And finally, David, a year or two from now, people say this movement has been successful so far. What have we achieved?
A constitutional amendment to get money out of politics. Once we achieve that, then all the other issues are a lot easier to achieve because the voice of the people can actually be what politicians are concerned with. 94% of the time, politician who spends most money on their campaign wins the election. Once we change that and the politicians aren't all concerned with the people who are funding their campaigns, they'll be concerned with the people of the United States, and then we'll get these regulations, the breaking up of the banks, and a whole host of issues. The root problem is money in politics, and if we can get a constitutional amendment to rid that, we've won.
Okay. I think I'm going to have to close it at that. The new book is This Changes Everything, Occupy Wall Street and the 99% Movement by Sarah Van Gelder and the staff of Yes Magazine. Websites to learn more about the work of each of our guests. For Sarah, it's yesmagazine.org. For Todd Gitlin, it's Todd Gitlin, that's TODD, GITLIN.net. For David DeGRAW, it's Amped Status, AMPED, STATUS, ampedstatus.com or .org, and OWS, Occupy Wall Street, OWSnews.org. And for OccupyLA, check out the websites facebook.com/OccupyLA or OccupyLosAngeles.org, or the new national sort of website for all of this is Occupy, INTER, occupy.org. And finally, thank you to Sarah Van Gelder, Todd Gitlin, David DeGRAW, and ELISE WHITAKER for everything you do. Keep up the good work.